Hello and welcome back to Seb Finance. In this video, we will be discussing 9 things to note when creating a budget. A budget is a crucial tool for managing your finances, and by following these tips, you can create a budget that helps you achieve your financial goals. Before we begin, please keep in mind that these tips are for educational purposes only and should not be considered as financial advice. It's important to consult a financial professional before making any financial decisions. Tip number 1, identify your income. The first step in creating a budget is to identify your income. This includes your salary, wages, tips, and any other sources of income you might have. This financial discipline requires you to be accurate and realistic in estimating your income. An example of this tip is looking at your pay stubs or bank statements to determine your income. Tip number 2, determine your fixed expenses. Fixed expenses are expenses that remain the same each month, such as rent, mortgage payments, car payments, and insurance premiums. This financial discipline requires you to be aware of your monthly fixed expenses and include them in your budget. An example of this tip is reviewing your bills and bank statements to determine your fixed expense. Tip number 3, calculate your variable expenses. Variable expenses are expenses that fluctuate each month, such as groceries, entertainment, and dining out. This financial discipline requires you to be aware of your spending habits and estimate your variable expenses as accurately as possible. An example of this tip is tracking your spending for a month to determine what the figure is for your variable expenses. Tip number 4, set financial goals. Setting financial goals is essential to creating a budget that aligns with your long-term financial objectives. This financial discipline requires you to be specific and realistic in setting your financial goals. An example of this tip is setting a goal to save a certain amount of money each month by paying off a specific debt by a certain date. Tip number 5, prioritize your expenses. Once you have identified your income and expenses and set your financial goals, it's essential to prioritize your expenses. This financial discipline requires you to be strategic and allocate your income towards your most important expenses first. An example of this tip is prioritizing your fixed expenses and financial goals before allocating money towards variable expenses. Tip number 6, consider seasonal expenses. Seasonal expenses such as holiday gifts or summer vacations can have a significant impact on your budget. This financial discipline requires you to be aware of your seasonal expenses and include them in your budget accordingly. An example of this tip is setting aside money each month towards your seasonal expenses. Tip number 6, set realistic goals. Setting realistic financial goals is an essential step in creating a budget that works for you. Whether your goal is to pay off debt, save for a down payment, or build an emergency fund, it's important to set goals that are achievable. This financial discipline requires you to be specific and break down your goals into actionable steps. An example is setting a goal to save $500 per month towards your emergency fund. Tip number 7, prioritize your spending. Prioritizing your spending is a crucial step in creating a budget that works for you. By identifying your needs versus your wants, you can make informed decisions about your spending. This financial discipline requires you to be mindful and avoid overspending on non-essential items. An example of this tip is prioritizing your fixed expenses and savings goals before allocating money towards your variable expenses. Tip number 8, plan for unexpected expenses. Unexpected expenses can happen at any time, and it's essential to plan for them in your budget. This financial discipline requires you to be proactive and set aside money each month for unexpected expenses, such as car repairs or medical bills. An example of this is creating a miscellaneous category in your budget to cover unexpected expenses. Tip number 9, use envelopes or digital categories to manage your spending. Using envelopes or digital categories to manage your spending is an effective way to stay within your budget. By allocating money towards specific categories such as groceries or entertainment, you can track your spending and avoid overspending. This financial discipline requires you to be organized and diligent in tracking your spending. An example of this tip is using budgeting apps that categorize your expenses, or by using physical envelopes to allocate money towards specific categories. Bonus, review and adjust your budget regularly. Reviewing and adjusting your budget regularly is essential to ensure that you are on track towards achieving your financial goals. By reviewing your budget every month, you can identify areas where you need to make adjustments and stay on track. This financial discipline requires you to be proactive and make changes when necessary. An example of this tip is reviewing your budget at the end of the month and adjusting your spending habits accordingly based on the categories you've set. Disclaimer: the tips provided in this video are for educational purposes only and should not be considered as financial advice. It's important to consult a financial professional before making any financial decisions. The information provided in this video is based on current knowledge and may be subject to change in the future. Thank you for watching this video. If you feel like there's something that we left out, feel free to leave it in the comment section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more personal finance and money management tips.